Parents framed me, watched me hit the end of a river, and celebrated the end of me. I came back stronger and made their world burn. The coffee is good this morning. That's not a small thing. I've learned not to treat small good things as small. The coffee is from a place in the city that I have delivered weekly at a cost that would have seemed obscene to the version of me that existed 10 years ago. The apartment is quiet. The light through the east windows at this hour is the specific gold of early morning that you only get if you're high enough and the city is still waking up below you. I have a meeting at 11, nothing before it. Nothing requires me to be anything other than what I am in this room at this hour. I am Edmund Hale. I'm going to tell you what that name means now, and what it used to mean, and what happened in the distance between those two things. Not for catharsis. I'm past catharsis. Not for understanding. I understand everything I need to understand about how it happened and why. I'm telling you because the story deserves to be told without the version of it that the people still living inside it would prefer you to hear. I'll start at the beginning. The Hales are old money in the specific English sense, which means the money is so old that its origins have become comfortable rather than examined. Land first, then property, then private equity when property became common. A name that opens certain doors not because of achievement but because of duration. We have simply been here long enough that being here has become a credential. I grew up inside that world with the specific complicated relationship of someone who both loves and distrusts the thing they were born into. I loved the house, a Georgian manor in a county I won't name, with grounds that had been tended for longer than most families have existed. I loved the work, the family's various business interests, property development primarily, the specific satisfaction of understanding how assets move and grow and compound across time. I was good at it. Better than anyone in the family wanted to fully acknowledge, because acknowledging it would have required them to act on it. And acting on it would have disturbed an arrangement that suited the people who had arranged it. I was the black sheep. Not for the reasons black sheep usually earn the title, not for wildness or excess or failure. I was the black sheep because I had the specific inconvenience of a conscience in a family that had long since concluded that conscience was a luxury affordable only to people without assets to protect. I asked questions that weren't meant to be asked. I noticed things that weren't meant to be noticed. I said things in rooms where the expectation was silence. Not frequently, not dramatically, just consistently, quietly, in the way of someone who finds it genuinely difficult to look at something wrong and pretend it's right. This quality, which in any reasonable world would simply be called integrity, was treated by my family as a character flaw requiring management. My brother Callum had no such flaw. Callum was 2 years younger and had the easy charm of someone who learned early that warmth and surface plausibility were sufficient substitutes for substance in the particular world we'd been born into. He was not unintelligent. He was something more dangerous. He was intelligent enough to know which rooms required what performance, and never curious enough to want anything the performance couldn't provide. My parents preferred Callum. I knew this from childhood. Not because they said so, the Hales are too well-bred for that kind of declaration, but in the accumulated thousand small signals of family life. The benefit of the doubt extended more readily. The patience was offered more generously. The mistakes were absorbed more quietly. I told myself it didn't matter. I was competent. I knew it. The work proved it. The family's business interests functioned better when I was managing them than when I wasn't, and everyone knew this even if nobody said it. I thought competence was enough. I was wrong about that. I found the records on a Tuesday afternoon in October. I was going through old estate documents, legitimately, for a property matter that required historical title research. The documents were in the archive room at the manor. I'd been in there many times. It wasn't a restricted space. Nobody had told me not to look because nobody had imagined I would find what I found. My grandmother Dorothy's medical records. a folder that had been misfiled with property documents, whether by accident or by the specific carelessness of people who believed certain things were safe because nobody would think to look for them. I opened the folder. I want to describe what I felt reading those records because it wasn't immediate. Understanding arrived slowly, the way a cold comes on, not a single moment but an accumulation. The medication names first. Some I recognized, some I didn't. I looked them up on my phone, sitting in that archive room with the afternoon light coming through the high windows. Sedatives, cognitive suppressants, things prescribed for specific conditions Dorothy had never, to my knowledge, been diagnosed with. The dates, running back years. A sustained pharmaceutical management of a woman's mind began approximately 8 years before her death. I sat with that for a while. Then I looked for Gerald's records. I found them in the same misfiled folder, same pattern, same timeline. 2 people, my grandparents, the people the wealth actually belonged to, systematically medicated into docility over the last years of their lives, while the financial and legal instruments that transferred that wealth to my parents were processed and filed and made permanent. I sat in that archive room for a long time. I thought about my grandparents as I'd known them in childhood, sharp, warm, present, and then in their later years, confused, forgetful, and easily managed. I had attributed it to age. Everyone had attributed it to age. The diagnosis of dementia had been provided by the family's private doctor, and nobody had questioned it because the family's private doctor was the family's private doctor, and questioning him would have meant questioning the family. I went back to the files. I was looking for something specific, but without knowing exactly what, the shape of a thing before I could name it. I found Victor, my father's stepbrother, Gerald's son from his first marriage, a marriage before Dorothy, a marriage the family discussed rarely and in a specific way of subjects that have been decided rather than simply forgotten. Victor had been in the family's orbit until approximately 12 years ago. Then he was. A misadventure, the family said. A tragedy. These things happen. I found the financial instrument signed 3 days before Victor's disappearance. A transfer of a significant portion of Gerald's estate, a portion that would have gone to Victor as Gerald's biological son, was redirected through a mechanism that required Gerald's signature. Gerald, who was by that point 3 years into his pharmaceutical management. I found the inquest records. Victor Hale ruled misadventure. The family's solicitors had represented the family's interests efficiently throughout. I found a witness statement that contradicted itself across 2 paragraphs in a way that hadn't been examined at the time because the inquest had been brief and the family had been present in the right rooms with the right people. I sat in the archive room until the light changed. Then I closed the folder. I put it back where I'd found it. I went home. I spent 3 days not telling anyone, not because I was afraid, because I was trying to find the version of what I'd found that was innocent. I'm a fair person, or I was. I gave it every charitable reading I could construct. Each one collapsed under the weight of the specific, dated, documented pattern in those files. On the 4th day, I went to my father. Richard Hale is a man of considerable intelligence and considerable self-possession. He has been managing difficult information for most of his adult life, and the specific skill set required for that management, the ability to remain completely calm while calculating response options, is perhaps the thing I admire most about him and despise most about him simultaneously. I told him what I'd found in his study. The door closed, the 2 of us. He listened to everything, didn't interrupt, didn't flinch. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, not the quiet of someone processing a shock, but the quiet of someone selecting from available responses. He said, "Edmund, these are old matters." I said I understood they were old. He said family stability required discretion, and I had always understood that. I said I was going to a solicitor. He looked at me for a moment. Something moved behind his eyes, not fear. Richard doesn't do fear. Calculation. The specific cold calculation of a man updating a model. He said, "I see." 2 words. And I knew in those 2 words, from a lifetime of knowing this man, that the conversation had ended and something else had begun. I didn't understand what it was yet. I understood 48 hours later. My mother called me. "Margaret Hale is calling to say she'd like to see me." My father had been upset by our conversation, and she thought we should all sit down together, that she had some things she wanted to say. She used her warm voice. Margaret has several voices. The warm one is the most dangerous. I went to the manor. The private doctor was there when I arrived. I didn't process this immediately. Dr. Ashworth had been the family's doctor for 20 years, and his presence at the house wasn't unusual. 2 men I didn't recognize were in the entrance hall. The family's solicitor, Pemberton, a man I dealt with professionally for years, was in the drawing room. My father came downstairs. I looked at the room. I looked at my father's expression, composed, careful, the specific expression of a man who has set something in motion and is waiting for it to arrive. I understood. I said, "What have you done?" What followed, my genuine distress and anger, the confrontation, my raised voice, my father's visible distress, the doctor's intervention, was witnessed by 2 people who had been positioned specifically to witness it. Every word I said that could be characterized as threatening was. Every movement I made that could be characterized as aggressive was. The doctor assessed my father with the efficient attention of someone executing a role he'd been briefed on in advance. I was asked to leave. Pemberton told me at the door, quietly, professionally, that the family was seeking a restraining order given my behavior that afternoon. I should expect documentation within 24 hours. He strongly advised me not to return to the property. I stood on the gravel drive of the house I'd grown up in and tried to locate something to hold onto. There wasn't anything. The restraining order arrived the following morning. By the end of that week, I had received calls from 3 professional contacts telling me, with varying degrees of awkwardness, that they were going to have to reconsider arrangements we'd been building. One of them said, and I believe he was being genuinely apologetic, that he'd heard some things that made him feel the timing wasn't right. He hoped I understood. I understood. The family's network had been activated. Not loudly. Not in a way that could be pointed at or confronted. The specific whispered efficiency of people who have spent generations understanding that reputation is a currency, and that currency can be spent in either direction. I was being removed, not from a room, from a world. What followed was 2 years I don't fully describe to anyone. Not because they were dramatic, because they were the opposite of dramatic. They were the sustained low-grade dismantling of a person by forces that operated just below visibility. Every time I found something to build toward, it fell apart. A position at a firm that had seemed certain, a phone call, an apologetic partner, timing issues, nothing personal. A consulting arrangement with a property developer, dissolved after a meeting I wasn't present at where someone had apparently raised concerns. I never knew exactly who. I never needed to know exactly who. The mechanism was the family, and the family was everywhere in the world I'd grown up trying to work in. The money went, not all at once. An investment I'd built carefully over a year, counterparty pulled out, wrong information, a sequence of bad timing that appeared entirely circumstantial. I lost most of what I had. The friends went, not dramatically. The specific drift of people who have been given a version of you that makes continued closeness inadvisable. I watched it happen from inside it and couldn't stop it because you can't defend yourself against something that operates through implication and atmosphere. You can't call someone and say, "I know someone spoke to you about me," and whatever they said wasn't the whole truth. That conversation makes you sound exactly like whatever they said. I was isolated, professionally, financially, socially. And I was carrying the knowledge of what my family had done to my grandparents, and to Victor knowledge that was real and documented and completely useless to me, because I had no platform, no credibility, no access to anyone who would listen to the exiled black sheep son over the Hale family's solicitors and their 30 years of institutional relationships. I kept going, longer than I should have needed to, not because I was resilient in the conventional sense, because I didn't have the specific capacity for the alternative yet. That capacity developed slowly, over months, in the accumulation of closed doors and drifting friendships and the specific silence of a phone that has stopped ringing. Then Imogen. I had been protecting her from the full picture, or protecting myself from having to speak it out loud to the person I'd believed in most. I told myself I was giving things time to resolve, that once I had something concrete to show her, something that proved what I knew and made it actionable, I would tell her everything. I didn't have that. I wasn't going to get it. I went to her anyway. She was waiting for me when I arrived. That was the first thing I noticed. She was waiting, not surprised, already composed in the specific way of someone who has been prepared. I told her what I'd found, what had happened, what I believed. She listened. Then she said she was sorry. I said I needed her, that I needed us to be something solid in the middle of all of it. She said she couldn't be that. Said things had become, she paused, choosing words that had been suggested to her, complicated. Said she had come to understand there were aspects of the situation she hadn't been fully aware of when we'd become engaged. I said, what does that mean? She said, and I want to be precise because I have been precise about this sentence in my own mind for years. She said that the introduction had come through arrangements she hadn't fully understood at the time, that she was sorry. She didn't say by whom. She didn't need to. The specific cold of that moment wasn't betrayal exactly. It was something more total. The understanding that the relationship I had believed I'd chosen, the one real thing I thought I'd found entirely on my own terms, had been another managed variable, a controlled element in an arrangement I hadn't been shown. I loved her, or I loved what I'd believed she was. I said nothing. I left. I have never spoken to Imogen since that evening. What happened to her later was not something I planned in that moment, but it was something I incorporated into the plan when I made it. The bridge was on a Thursday. Late, cold. The specific emptiness of a city at 3 in the morning, when the people who are out for reasons that don't involve witnessing anything. I'm not going to narrate what I felt standing there. Not because it's too private, because the feeling was simply the logical endpoint of a calculation that had been running quietly for 2 years. Everything had been removed. Everything I tried to rebuild had been quietly dismantled. I was carrying knowledge I couldn't use. I had no money, no professional standing, no relationships that hadn't been contaminated. I was 29 years old, and the specific future I'd been moving toward no longer had a shape I could see. The calculation resolved. I went over. The water was very cold. Someone was nearby, I don't know who, I have never tried to find out. I was pulled out. I was taken somewhere. I was assessed and treated and kept for 3 days. Nobody came. That's the detail that matters most about those 3 days. Not the bridge, not the water. The 3 days in a hospital bed and nobody coming. I lay there and I thought about that, about what it meant, about the specific shape of a life that had been reduced to this room with these walls and this silence. On the 3rd day, I got up. I discharged myself. I found a room. I worked something menial for enough weeks to have money to work something slightly less menial. I didn't have a plan yet. I had something prior to a plan, a direction, a compass bearing without a map. The grief came on a Sunday morning, about 4 months after the bridge. I was walking somewhere ordinary, a park, and there was a family completely ordinary. Nothing remarkable about them. A father and a small child doing something with a football that the child was too young to do properly, but the father was making possible by adjusting his own participation to meet the child where they were. I watched them for a moment, and I felt the loss of it. Not the family specifically, the version of myself that had believed those things were available to me. The man who had worked dutifully and loved his work and trusted his father and found a woman he believed had found him back. The man who had walked into the archive room on a Tuesday afternoon with no idea what he was about to read. That man was gone. What had replaced him was still being assembled, but it was already clear it would be different in every way that mattered. I stood in the park and I grieved him. Briefly, completely. The specific respect of acknowledging a loss rather than pretending it isn't one. Then I closed the door. Quietly, without drama. And I began. I will not give you the rise in detail. Not because it isn't real, it is, every year of it, every deal and every decision, but because the rise is not the point. The rise was the instrument. What matters is what it was building toward and what it took to get there. What I'll tell you is this. I built from nothing in a city where nobody knew my name or my family's name or the story that had been circulated through the networks of a world I was now outside. I was careful with every resource, meticulous with every relationship. I chose who I let close with the attention of someone who understands precisely what can be done with trust once it's established, because I was taught that lesson by the best possible teachers. I was good at what I did, better than good. The specific competence that the Hale family had spent years benefiting from and then decided they could afford to exile turned out to be, in a different context, without the weight of managed suppression, rather extraordinary. I built something real. I mean that without qualification. The business I built is genuinely good, and the people in it are genuinely good, and the work it does is done well and ethically, and I am proud of it in a way that has nothing to do with what it funded. But underneath all of it, from the first day to the last, a quiet certainty. I knew where this was going. Not as a fantasy, not as rage kept warm over years, as a plan, specific, patient, waiting for the conditions to be right. The conditions took 7 years to be right. Then they were. Callum provided the material himself, simply by being Callum across 7 years of decisions that were made with the specific carelessness of someone who has never once believed consequences applied to him. Financial irregularities, professional conduct that couldn't survive examination. A pattern of behavior that, documented carefully and surfaced through the right channels at the right moment, looked exactly like what it was, not because I invented anything, but because I built the frame around what was already there. The frame went up quietly, anonymously, through intermediaries who didn't know who had commissioned them or why. Callum's position in the family's business interests became untenable, then impossible. He was removed, not dramatically. The family managed it as they managed everything, quietly and with the minimum of visible damage, but removed completely and permanently. My father understood something was happening before it was finished. He's too intelligent not to. He began making inquiries. The inquiries led nowhere because I had ensured they would lead nowhere. Richard Hale spent the years of my ruination being untouchable. There had never been anything to grab, everything deniable, everything at a distance. I gave him the same experience. He could feel me, could sense the shape of what was moving against him, but every hand he reached out to grab it found nothing. I imagined that was a new experience for him. The acquisition happened through layers. 5 holding companies across 3 jurisdictions, third-party intermediaries, debt acquisition, equity maneuvers, each transaction legitimate, each one individually explainable as normal commercial activity, together the shape of something else entirely. The family's solicitors eventually identified a pattern. Pemberton, the same Pemberton who had stood at the manor's front door and told me to expect the restraining order, was the one who brought the analysis to my father. I know the moment Richard understood it was me. I know it because of what happened in the weeks that followed, the frantic, ultimately futile attempts to locate something actionable, something provable, something that would allow him to move against what was moving against him. He found nothing. He could prove nothing. The transactions were clean. The intermediaries were clean. The documentation was impeccable. He watched. That was all he could do. Watch while I dismantled everything he had built. The ruination was not impulsive. I want to be clear about that because I want you to understand what I did and who did it. This was not rage. Rage is uncontrolled, and I had complete control of every part of this. What it was, if I'm being honest, if I'm giving you the accurate word, was cold. The same cold that came back up with me from the water on that Thursday night. The same cold that had been the most reliable thing I'd had in 7 years of building. I redirected the family's significant client relationships, not crudely, over 18 months, professionally, in ways that appeared entirely consistent with normal commercial drift. The clients went elsewhere, and I had ensured elsewhere was an excellent option for them. They had no complaints. They simply had better alternatives available. The key staff, the people who had simply shown up to work and had nothing to do with any of it, I moved first. Good positions, better than what they'd had. I owed them that, and I paid it. The contracts were allowed to lapse. The renewal conversations that should have happened didn't happen because the people who should have been having them were no longer in positions to have them. The business hollowed from the inside while its external appearance was maintained just long enough. The secret, the grandparents, the medication, Victor, traveled through the family's own network. The same infrastructure that had been used to whisper about me for years turned in a new direction. I gave the right information to the right conduits and let the network do what networks do. Anonymous, untraceable. Arriving in the right drawing rooms and the right club bars and the right dinner tables with the specific quiet devastation of something that sounds like it might be true, and then, the more you look at it, absolutely is. The family couldn't respond. To respond would have required acknowledgement. Acknowledgement would have required explanation. Explanation would have opened the whole thing to examination, and examination was the one thing they had spent decades preventing. They absorbed it, in silence. The specific silence of people watching something they built over generations becoming something they can't protect. I timed the sale to coincide. The buyer was a man named Darren Ockafer, self-made, north of England. No background, no connections, no name that opened doors in the world the Hales had always occupied. A good businessman, I had assessed him carefully, who understood what he was acquiring and what had been done to it and what it would take to rebuild. He paid what it was worth in its current state, which was very little. The price was the insult in numerical form. I didn't need the money. The number was the message, and the message was delivered to Richard Hale on a Tuesday afternoon when Pemberton called to confirm the sale had completed. I was in my apartment when it completed. The coffee was good that morning too. Imogen. I said her name fell in the final accounting, and it did. I won't dress this up as something other than what it was. She was a participant. The degree to which she understood the full architecture of what she participated in, how much she knew versus how much she was managed, I genuinely don't know. The arrangements she didn't fully understand could have been true in a partial sense. People can be used without understanding they're being used. It didn't change the accounting. The arrangement she had entered with the family after our engagement ended, the position, the relationship with Callum, the specific social world the family had absorbed her into, collapsed along with everything else. When the family's position collapsed, hers collapsed with it, because she had tied herself to something that turned out to be temporary. I did not target her specifically. She was in the structure, and the structure came down. She reached out once. A message through an intermediary. She couldn't reach me directly. I had ensured that long ago. The message asked if we could speak. I didn't respond. Not out of cruelty, out of completion. The account was settled. There was nothing left to say that would serve any purpose except her own need for a conclusion I wasn't obligated to provide. The door was closed. Richard Hale is alive. I mention this not because it matters practically, but because I want to be precise about what the ruination did and didn't do. It took the business. It took the social standing. It took the network built over generations, and the name's value in the rooms that name used to open. It took Callum's position and Imogen's arrangement, and the comfortable certainty of a family that had spent decades believing itself untouchable. It did not take his life. It did not take his house. It did not take whatever remains of his relationship with my mother. He lives, he knows it was me. He cannot prove it. I think about him occasionally, not with feeling exactly, but with the specific attention of someone checking that a door they closed is still closed. It is. It will remain closed. He has nothing left to spend against me, and he knows it. We will not speak again. That is not a decision I made dramatically or in anger. It is simply the natural state of things. There is nothing between us anymore. No business. No family structure. No history that either of us would benefit from revisiting. Two people who used to be connected and are no longer. The connection was severed by him. The finality of the severance was provided by me. Victor never got justice. I want to say that clearly because I don't want to dress the exposure of the secret as something it wasn't. It was not justice for Victor. Justice for Victor would have required a different kind of action that I did not take because I am not a different kind of person. What the exposure was the removal of the family's ability to continue benefiting from what they did while everyone around them pretended not to know. The secret is known now. In the world that mattered to them, it is known. Nobody can unknow it. Whether that is justice or simply the closest available approximation is a question I have stopped asking. The apartment is quiet. The light through the east windows has moved across the floor while I've been sitting here. The coffee is finished. The city below is doing what cities do, ordinary commerce, ordinary motion, the entirely indifferent machinery of a world that continued through all of it and will continue after all of it. I have a meeting at 11. Before I go, I want to tell you one true thing about who I am now, not as confession, not as apology, as accuracy. I am not the man I was when I walked into the archive room on a Tuesday afternoon in October. That man had a conscience that he believed was a virtue. He was right that it was a virtue. He was wrong that virtue is sufficient protection in a world where the people who should have protected him had decided long ago that their own interests were the only interests that mattered. That man went into the water on a Thursday night, and something came back up that was him in the technical sense. Same body, same mind, same specific competence that had always been there, but different in the way that matters. The cold that came back with me from the water is still there. It has never left. I have built my entire subsequent life around it, and because of it, and I am not capable of the performance of regret about that. I did what I did. I would do it again. Not every ending is a sunrise. Not every story resolves into something you can hold up to the light. Some things finish in the dark, and the people walking away from them carry the dark with them permanently, and that is simply the cost of what was done to them and what they did in return. Brighter the light, longer the shadow. I have an extraordinary life. I built it entirely myself from nothing on a foundation of cold purpose and the specific competence my family spent years suppressing. It is real in every way that matters. The people in it are real. The work is real. The shadow behind it is equally real. I don't ask you to admire me. I don't ask you to condemn me. I ask only that you understand me accurately, which is more than anyone in the world I came from ever managed. Edmund Hale. Alone in an expensive apartment at 8 in the morning. The coffee was good.